Hello. First of all, let me thank you, the Center of Japanese Studies of the University of Bucharest, as well Ritsumeikan University, for inviting me, for accepting my proposal paper for this International Symposium of Japanese Studies. And what I'm going to present today is my my paper, my conference about the value of misconception, the other, the case of Japanese swords and its fittings in the late 19th century and the early 20th centuries. Well, first of all, we will start with a historical fact that most of you will know very well. That is in the 53, the Commodore Perry arrived to Japan, and because of this, Japan starts to open to the world and to start treaties with Western nations, like, for example, the Kanagawa Treaty that opened the port of Kanagawa. But as you should know, this port became so small, and then they decide to move to the Yokohama port. That nowadays, Yokohama, as many of you will know, is the second city in Japan with the biggest population. Well, that started in this period, in the middle of the 19th century, with the open of the Yokohama port. And about Yokohama, the areas of Kannai and Yamate became so popular to have uh, their own streets, their own shops, and their own hotels, especially focused in Western people that came to Japan to commerce or to do business or just to diplomatic ways. Take a look of these pictures of the old Yokohama, where we can see the streets where these Westerns walk along. Now this is nowadays Kannai area of Yokohama, and that Westerns that came to Japan often want to buy some souvenirs, often want to buy some gifts to for their families when they came back. It's especially mentioned in this case the Hotel Yokohama, or the Yokohama Hotel, or the Grand Hotel Yokohama, that was first opened in the 1860 and was the first Western hotel in Japan. Then it burns and then reopened again, as we know today, the Grand Hotel Yokohama. It's very important, this case, because in this hotel, they will mix the Japanese traditional culture with the Japanese traditional culture that the Westerns wanted to see. You will know, samurai, geisha, and so on. So maybe most of the things we will talk about in this conference about the misconception of the other, we will see in this focus on Yokohama, or even in this building of the Yokohama Hotel, where these diplomats, these salesmen, and these businessmen from Western nations came to Japan. And regarding the souvenirs I told you before, and their interest of the Western people, that was the old Japan, the traditional Japan, the romantic Japan that is, as I told you, samurai, geisha. And what's the main weapon of the samurai? We don't talk about historical weapon like the bow, but the most iconic weapon is the sword, the Japanese sword, the samurai sword, that is the Nihonto. Well, this is a weapon, of course, but we must just start this conference by knowing that Japanese sword, the Nihonto, is a piece of art, not only a weapon, and not only a piece of art, but an entire museum of pieces of art making by the finest, not only forgers, but also silversmiths, goldsmiths, and all kind of artists. So when they ask, I want to buy a samurai sword, a Japanese sword, uh, I imagine the shops there will offer this, that is the Nihonto. You can see many types from many ages. And of course, if we talk with the full Japanese sword, with the full fittings, that is the koshirai, they will offer to the Westerns these kinds of swords, this kind of weapons. But what happened? As I told you, these are pieces of art. Consider with the consideration of piece of art for many centuries in Japan. So are very, very expensive, even today, but even in those days. So when they ask for a souvenir, for some gift for their families or friends to see the exotic Japan, maybe they are not so much interested in this fine piece of art that, well, we can see some Japanese sword with some decoration of gold, but I can see samurai, I can see geisha. So they and even are so expensive for a souvenir. So finally, what they get, this. These are swords. The blade are even not forged in the major case, are mass-produced pieces with fittings and with a scabbard made of bone. Not even ivory, but bones. Sometimes ox, but sometimes even butcher bones. So very low quality. So this kind of junk is what major Western people that came to Japan from the middle 19th century to the early 20th century bought in Japan and bring back to their homes. And I can assure you that most of the public and private collections in the entire world of these Western businessmen and salesmen and diplomats that came to Japan and brought these souvenirs are full of this kind of souvenir that they call in Japanese shiremono. Well, uh, they they are even today sold and pretend to sold as ivory samurai swords. Uh, Ivory work for swords did exist in Japan. Of course, it was not very common. It was just a strange case for rich samurai or for rich businessmen from the Chonin, and it was not very common indeed. As China has a strong culture of carving the ivory, it's not, as I said, very common in Japan, but it exists. They have very fine ivory works, as you can see. But this is not the case even with mother pearl. But this is not the case of the shiremono of the souvenirs I told you before, with, of course, samurai portraits, because they want samurai. I came from Japan, the country of the samurai, so I want samurai weapons with samurai carved. We can see that this is not ivory when we look closely, and we can see the porosity of the bone that it's not possible to see in the fine ivory. And of course, not only samurai, but China's philosophers and aristocrats from the old imperial culture. And of course, all full with the Tokugawa mon, that is the crest of the Tokugawa Bakufu, the previous governor of Japan from the Tokugawa family, that it didn't exist as a government when this piece was created in the late 19th century. So it's just a kind of souvenir that with samurai that they was exchanged in the 1868, and full of Tokugawa mon, that it was a government that didn't exist also since 1868, since the new Meiji Jidai or Meiji era. So there are, of course, fakes, pieces, junk pieces that we can see the misconception of the other. We go further to another of the parts of the Japanese sword, that is the sword guard, the tsuba. And when they ask some of these parts, what they will offer. For example, this kind of tosho tsuba that are forged sword guards that are very fine. And in this case, in this particular case, they are also expensive. We see that it's very simple, but also are expensive. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was told that this kind of, they offer this kind of sword guards like tsuba. Or, for example, this other from the Nara School of Super Makers, made of soft metals like copper. Or this other tsuba, like, for example, Chuso tsuba, or Goto School tsuba, Shimizu tsuba, or Hirata tsuba. But what they got, what they asked for, were one of the groups they both are one of the cheapest tsuba that we can find in Japan, not from this 19th century, but even from the 18th century. That is the group called Nanban tsuba, or Asian sports sword guards, that are, most of them, sword guards made in China and other Asian countries, or made in these Asian countries and export to Japan, and then they make copy of this tsuba in Japan. So this strange tsuba, this strange sword guards with China's motifs, mobile parts like these dragons and this jewel. If you touch it, it moves, and this with gold goldsmith work, but with a very cheap technique and old technique, that is mixing the gold with mercury, and they apply it to the sword guard, and then hitting, and then the mercury goes away and stays the gold in the piece. That is called the keshikomi zogan. Well, this kind of sword guards that are not bad and they are beautiful, they are not junk, but inside the world, the art history of the tsuba, the Japanese sword gods. They are one of the cheapest, but also one of the most baroque. And with this exotic motif, this is what the Westerns wanted, to show their friends and families, to say, hey, I was in the far, far Asia. Although tsuba that they bought, because they are also very cheap, was the cast tsuba. So, of course, against samurai, against other motifs made by cast, it was very uncommon to use the cast processors to make tsuba. They forged the tsuba like the blades of the swords when it was made of steel, and they mixed the soft metals like copper and gold to create one piece, and then they carved. That was the most common works in tsuba, not cast. But especially from the beginning, from the middle 19th century, and especially in the early 20th century, they made a lot of cast tsuba to sell to Westerns, to sell for this kind of souvenirs. And then we will find another group of tsuba that is called Nagoya mono tsuba, or the tsuba made in Nagoya. That was not tsuba, not sword made by artists or by schools with names and with signatures, but mass production tsuba, mass production pieces to sell very cheap and to sell souvenirs. This kind of souvenir started in the early 18th century for the samurai that goes to the Sankin-kotai, for example, and return to their domains with souvenirs. Then you can buy very cheap tsuba for souvenirs if you don't have the money to buy the other ones. But this kind of old Japanese souvenir, it was very common for Western souvenirs too, and it was cheap tsuba that resembles some kind of the good ones. And again, all of these pictures I will show you, most of all these pictures I will show you in this conference, is what pictures I took from private and public collections of these Westerns that came to Japan in the middle 19th century till the middle 20th century. And they bought all of this for these collections. And if we take a look to this work of kind of bubbles that it's called fish eggs, called nanako. This was made with these tools, the tagane, and we will find one single bubble, two or three at least. And with careful, the artist will hit one by one to create this pattern, this surface. So if we compare the Nagoya mono tsuba with this superb work of the artist Iwamoto Konkan, we will see that the Nagoya mono tsuba are mass production sword gods, very cheap, very fast, with less care than the good ones produced with the school of artists of tsuba. About the cast tsuba, take a look of what we will receive if we bought this cast tsuba. And this other Iwamoto Konkan tsuba, carved. This is all carved in this soft metal tsuba made by copper and gold that is called shakudo. And look also the goldsmith work of Iwamoto Konkan that put copper and put gold in the eyes of these monkeys that are hiding in this tree from this eagle. So this is superb work comparison with this souvenir work that bought many of the Westerns. As many of the Westerns arrived to Yokohama, this kind of shops and also girls that make all this souvenir start not to sell, but also to make it in the same docks of Yokohama. As, for example, the area of today, the Yamashita Koen, or this building called Akarenga Soko, that you can imagine, it's called Akarenga because it's made of red bricks. And we can find all this souvenir, all these very low quality products sold for Westerns and called hamamono, as the things that are sold in the docks of Yokohama. So this is one misconception of the other. By the way, this Akarenga Soko is nowadays very well known because the Pikachu parades starts there every year. And talking about another misconception of the other, take a look of these shape forms on this other sogard. This kind of heart shape are very popular in Westerns because they see in most Japanese artworks the shape of a heart, and they want to buy it because they think they're so cute and so interesting. But this is another weapon, the halberd, the naginata. But this is again a misconception of the other, because this heart shape in Japan, it means the Inoshishi no me, or the wild boar eye pattern. So this kind of decoration is called inome sukashi, that is carving the shape of a wild boar eye. But the misconception of the other, it was not only the misconception of the Westerns about the Japanese, but also sometimes the Japanese about the Westerns. As we can see in this fine artist called Hirado Kunishige that work Japanese suba, very fine quality pieces. And they find very interesting to put Western letters from the alphabet in this suba with no meaning, mixing them very chaotic just for decoration. If we go to the another part of the Japanese suba, the Japanese sword, that is the menuki, this is the decoration part on the handle of the Japanese sword, we will find these fine works with goldsmith and silversmith work. This is for decorate the handle of the Japanese sword, but the Westerns bought them and converted it in some other tools for the clothes, like for example this brooch for the jackets of the suits. They convert this menuki from the Japanese sword to these pieces, and also as a cufflinks for also your suit. They converted this menuki from Japanese sword to dress it, as you can see. And also necklace. They found very cute, and they put it single ones or all together to make bracelets or make a necklace. As you can see, this is parts of the Japanese sword. And about these other pieces that are the kozuka, kogatana, and the koai, that are parts inside the Japanese sword. First of all, if we talk about the kogai, most people, most Westerns, but also some nowadays Japanese, they think they are weapons because they are inside the Japanese sword, but there are no weapons. The kogai is made for the hairpin of the samurai. There are kansashi of the man of the samurai. But also we look this part of the kogai, we couldn't imagine what is made for if we think part inside Japanese sword and also made of gold and silver, very fine piece of art. Well, this kind of spoon is to remove the wax of the ear. It's an ear pick. And about the kozuka and the kogatana, this kind of short knife that is inside Japanese sword, it's not a weapon, but a piece to use to cut paper or to cut letters. And what Westerns converted? Well, they converted in knives and forks for eating. So we can see we saw many kinds of misconception the other. Of course, if we go far away in the middle of the 20th century, we will see subtle images of the misconception the other when the US Army stole many Japanese swords and they treated like junk, and many of these swords are piece of art. But this is another story. And thank you very much for your attention. And I hope you like this small conference about the misconception of the other regarding the Japanese sword fittings. Thank you very much.